Boardroom, Chapter 35, Part B, 1000 BC, Goliath. Just then the sun inched over the horizon, blinding David and Junior momentarily. When David turned back to answer his friend, was only empty ground next to him. David squinted into the yet dim light and thought he saw some movement near the brook that ran through no man's land, the expanse of land between the two armies. "Here he is," a voice said behind him. "Where?" David said reflexively. He then turned to see little Mephibosheth right on his heels. He was pointing to the left toward the brook. David froze as he stared at the 12-foot figure washing himself in the brook. Look how big he is," Mephibosheth said, seemingly fearless of the monster. It was customary for the armies to bathe and toilet in the same area before sunup. These two armies had been squared off against one another for 30 days, and everyone was getting to know everyone on the other side. "Let's go talk to him, David," Mephibosheth urged. "What? You crazy?" "No, I'd like to meet the man who's going to kill my father today." David, as he had been many times before, was astonished at his best friend's son. But what David did not realize about the 4-foot 6-inch boy with a crutch in one hand was that Mephibosheth had nothing to lose. He had no expectations in life, nothing better to look forward to tomorrow than he did today. And that fact gave diminutive little Mephibosheth a power no one else on the battlefield possessed. Mephibosheth's life was as good as it would get. David thought many times he too was up to as good as it would get. Then he would somehow win another battle despite heavy odds, and he would acknowledge that God had yet more in store for him. Mephibosheth grabbed David's sinewy right arm with his left and his crutch with his right arm, and the two headed down into the valley toward the 12-foot figure. 3 female slaves were busy bathing the giant of a man as David and Mephibosheth approached. Pretending not to notice the huge man, David knelt down and began scrubbing his face with the cool water. Mephibosheth just stared at the massive, unclothed figure before him. "Nice morning," the giant said, his booming voice startling both of them. His voice was deep and resonant. It seemed to both David and Mephibosheth that the ground shook when he spoke. David found himself staring at the giant's appropriately proportioned private parts, but little Mephibosheth could not take his eyes off the giant's gold-pointed teeth. They meshed together like those of a shark Mephibosheth had seen in a pond at the aquarium in Alexandria. "My name's Goliath," the giant said. "You boys would be?" "David, and this is my little friend Mephibosheth." David's hands were trembling. Mephibosheth just kept staring. "You boys come to see the excitement?" David didn't like being called a boy, but it happened often as he had a very boyish face. "What excitement?" David said as calmly as he could. "Gonna kill the chief of that Judean army today." "My dad?" David clapped his hand on Mephibosheth's mouth. "What'd you say, sonny?" Goliath laughed in a roar that shook the ground again. He held one of the beautiful dark-haired slaves in one hand as she scrubbed his clean-shaven face. David noticed the giant had a prominent forehead with slight ridges above each eye socket. He had seen this facial feature once before. It was in a battle against the Neanderthal up on the Lebanon border. They were fierce fighters, but short in stature, no more than 5 feet tall. David's army had prevailed once again. "So why are you going to kill this, chief?" Goliath bellowed. "It's been 30 days. It's time to end the standoff." "You kill a lot of men?" David asked the giant. "Yeah." "How many?" Mephibosheth asked quickly. 50, maybe 60,000. "Wow," Mephibosheth exclaimed. "Enjoy it?" David asked. Well, I did it first, but then with that no one to challenge me anymore, well, doesn't do much for me anymore. I've beaten the best, so no, I guess I don't enjoy it. It's just a means to an end. When Philistia conquers the world, then I will have it all. No more killing." "Then what will you do? I assume you will then be king of the world?" I'll just sit back and rule and paint. Really, David said. Yes, I like to paint, the giant said, a hint of a smile now on his face. Hey, giant, I like to paint too. I'm getting hungry, David said, interrupting his little buddy. I guess we better get going. Big day ahead. What are you guys doing? Going hunting? Goliath said. Yeah, you could say that, David said. Well, good luck. Hope you have as much success as I will, Goliath said. Maybe more, David said, bringing a puzzled look to Goliath's face. Here, David, here's the perfect stone. Mephibosheth handed David a smooth disc-shaped stone he had in his pocket. Great, David said. Mark it G. Mephibosheth took a piece of charcoal from his pocket and wrote G on the stone. Hey, Sonny, what's that G for? Goliath called as the two walked away. The giant had superhuman sight and hearing. God, David called back to the puzzled giant. Up on Saturn, there were nervous smiles all around. They were happy with David's confidence, but remained unsure where David's focus was. On Jupiter, all were confident Goliath would destroy David and in turn the Judean army. The end result should be a total victory over God-fearing people on Earth. But all on Jupiter were aware this scenario had happened time and time and time again, and it would not surprise them if once again one of God's persistent little followers got up off the mat and saved the day once again. The cry of unfair was voiced over and over again, but they all knew Pops would not listen. He had vowed to his followers, few and far between as they were, that if they did what Pops, said, he would protect and support them. By 8:30 in the morning, there was a buzz throughout both camps. The usual mandatory activities were completed and the opposing armies were getting into battle formation. All knew that whatever happened between Goliath and his challenger, there would be most assuredly a fight this day, a fight to the death. Both armies had seen plenty of carnage, but both were concerned today that one side or the other would be annihilated this day. That is, wiped off the face of the earth, never to fight, much less breathe again. Though the Philistine army was fully confident, and what army wouldn't be with such an intimidator as the man from Gath, they were keenly aware of how Saul's army had won many a battle against insurmountable odds. Everyone in the Judean ranks was certain it was their last day to live, but they had no choice but to stand and fight. If they deserted, they would be killed, and if they fought, they would be killed. Several had taken the easy route the night before and committed mutual suicide, but most were resigned to going out in the morning and cutting up as many of the enemy as they could before being cut to pieces themselves. Once in battle line and facing one another, the two armies waited eagerly to see the one-on-one matchup of Goliath of Gath versus Jonathan of Judea. All eyes were on the giant as he marched forward with his usual swagger to within 100 yards of the brook dividing the battlefield. Goliath now bellowed out his daily challenge. His deep, resonating voice was again heard by everyone on both sides of that brook. David and his sidekick, little 15-year-old Mephibosheth, were off to the left flank of the army, digging in the stream bed. They were searching for more stones, but the one they had found earlier with the G on it was still the most perfect one. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, David had convinced Saul to let him have first crack at the giant. So about 8 o'clock, David and Mephibosheth had gone out to scour the brook again for stones. It was another hot, steamy Judean day, nearly 90 degrees already, and everyone, including Goliath, was sweating. I am Goliath of Gath, god of the Philistines, and soon to be god of Judea. David and Mephibosheth noticed the ground was still shaking with each word of the giant, and quickly put the stones they had into David's stone pouch and looked over at the two armies and Goliath. Who will challenge me? He roared again. There was no answer forthcoming, no movement on either side. I repeat, who will challenge me? Again no one stepped forward, but Jonathan now turned and reached for his sword. No one will come forth. I order you and your army to surrender. Goliath's rant had been going on. David and Mephibosheth walked unnoticed to the middle of the battlefield and stood at the brook's edge staring at the giant. David had his shepherd's coat on, and Mephibosheth had on a soldier's uniform, but no one took notice. All eyes were on the fully armored giant towering over them. "I'll give you one last time, then we will charge forward and demolish you. I say again, for the third and last time, who will challenge Goliath of Gath, god of the Philistines?" David stared at the giant, then took his ram's horn from his belt, put it to his lips, and blew as hard as he could. Every eye, including Goliath's two black ones, turned to see where the sound of the horn was coming from. "The god of Judea," David yelled as loudly as he could. "I say again, who will challenge the god of the Philistines? And I say again, the god of Judea." Goliath now realized where the voice had come from and took a few steps toward David and Mephibosheth. Not only was Goliath large, but his senses were far keener than normal humans. He immediately recognized David and Mephibosheth as the two boys he had met at the brook earlier that morning. A big grin came to his freshly shaven face. "You boys serious? You, me?" He pointed to the boys and then himself. "Is all Judea so afraid of me that they send boys to do a man's job?" He roared with laughter, as did most of his army. Every knee in the Judean army was knocking one against the other, save four. David was busy sizing up his opponent, and little Mephibosheth, well, he still had nothing to lose. David had killed a lion with his bare hands, but that now seemed a walk in the park. He had lunged for and seized the private parts of the cat, and that fight was over quickly. From that point on, David realized every foe, no matter how formidable, had a weakness. But so far he had not found one in this giant staring at him across the brook. He remembered seeing the big man's privates the day before, but today they were fully protected. Goliath's most prominent feature was his Neanderthal-type forehead, but that too was well covered. He would have to wait until God opened the door for him, but it would have to happen pretty soon. David did not have to wait long. Goliath had begun to laugh at the absurdity of the fighting a boy who was already covered in sweat and was now running into his eyes, and now salty tears also filled them. "Load me the G, Mephibosheth," David said to his nervous little friend. "Okay, sir," Mephibosheth said as he loaded the perfect stone with the G written onto it into David's sling. "Don't call me sir, I'm just your friend," David admonished, taking the loaded sling from Mephibosheth. "Sorry, sir." David gave him a stare, then slowly began to twirl the loaded sling over his head. Goliath began to laugh harder, pointing out the boy with the sling to his fellow soldiers, which included his own 10-year-old son, who was already 8 feet tall. The salt water in the giant's eyes finally blurred his vision, and he flipped back his face guard just long enough to wipe his eyes with a cloth. It was a split second too long. David had been watching intently for his opening. As soon as the face guard went up, David let the G-stone fly. Goliath had no sooner wiped his eyes than he looked up to see the saucer-like projectile coming straight at him. The G-stone landed squarely on the giant's prominent Neanderthal forehead, splitting his skull completely in two. As the stone fell away, the mark of an inverse G remained in the forehead of the fallen giant. The rest was history.